I will never forget the sound of the wrapping paper as it tore beneath Kaya's careful fingers. The noise filled the silent room, each crinkle amplified by the absence of holiday cheer. No music played in the background. No conversation flowed between family members, just the delicate sound of my 7-year-old daughter unwrapping what she believed was her first gift from her grandfather. The silver paper gave way beneath her small, determined hands. She worked with such reverence, preserving each fold, as if the wrapping itself was something to treasure. For a fleeting moment, her face brightened with that pure, unguarded hope that only children possess, that magical anticipation that makes Christmas morning sacred in their eyes. My heart raced with anxiety as I watched her lift the lid. I knew these people, my family by blood, but strangers by choice. I knew their capacity for cruelty disguised as lessons. Her expression shifted when she peered inside, confusion rippling across her features like a stone dropped in still water. Her shoulders tensed, and she glanced up at me with uncertainty clouding her eyes. The box contained nothing, absolutely nothing. Before I could react, before I could protect her from what was coming, my father's harsh laugh cut through the room. Frank settled deeper into his armchair, a self-satisfied smirk spreading across his face as he announced that children like her shouldn't expect handouts, that the world already had enough parasites. The heat of shame and anger flooded my chest. My hands trembled in my lap as I struggled to find words, to defend my daughter, to shield her from this deliberate cruelty. But years of conditioning rendered me momentarily mute, my throat constricting around the words I desperately needed to speak. Sandra, my sister, seized the opportunity to twist the knife deeper. She muttered that Kaya was just like me, always expecting something for nothing, worthless. The familiar barb struck its intended target, reopening old wounds I thought had finally scarred over. I forced myself to look at Kaya, her lips pressed together in a tight line, her chin quivering with the effort of holding back tears. Her big brown eyes, so much like mine, shimmered with unshed tears as she fought to maintain her dignity. She looked at me again, not pleading for intervention, but checking if this was a hurt she should acknowledge or pretend didn't exist. The unspoken question in her eyes crushed me more than any insult my father could deliver. Self-loathing washed over me in that moment. What kind of mother brings her child into a den of wolves? What delusion had convinced me that these people, who had never shown me unconditional love, would somehow see my daughter's worth, that they might treat her differently than they had treated me? The grandfather clock in the corner marked each excruciating second with mechanical precision. The soft hum of the heating system seemed to grow louder in the oppressive silence. I watched Kaya's small fingers trace the edge of the empty box before carefully folding the flaps closed, as if completing the ritual might somehow change the outcome. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the empty box aside. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she told my father she had brought him a gift too. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Frank looked up, his expression a mixture of amusement and contempt, as he remarked that this ought to be entertaining. The mockery in his tone was unmistakable, but something remarkable happened then. Kaya didn't shrink away. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a carefully folded piece of paper. She approached him with measured steps and extended it toward him with both hands, offering this small piece of herself with ceremonial dignity. I held my breath, sensing a pivotal moment unfolding before me, something none of us were prepared for, least of all Frank. The visit had been Kaya's idea. After years of avoiding my family, of creating new traditions that didn't include toxic relatives, my daughter had begun asking questions. 3 weeks before Christmas, she'd wondered aloud if she had grandparents like her friends at school. The innocence of her question had pierced my carefully constructed defenses. I'd tried to shield her from my family's coldness, from the emotional wasteland I'd escaped when I left home. But her simple question, asked with such genuine curiosity, made me question whether I was protecting her or merely projecting my own fears. So against my better judgment, I'd said yes when she asked if we could visit them for Christmas. Some foolish part of me hoped that perhaps time had softened their edges, that seeing my beautiful, kind-hearted daughter might awaken something dormant in their hearts. Reality crashed down the moment we pulled into their immaculate driveway. The familiar tension wrapped around my chest like a vise as we approached the house. Still perfect, still cold, still more showroom than home. The pine-scented air freshener couldn't mask the emotional sterility that permeated every corner. My mother's greeting was a masterclass in superficial warmth, quick embrace for me, perfunctory pat for Kaya, and a lingering assessment of our appearance that found us wanting. I noticed how her gaze fixated on the worn spots on Kaya's winter boots, the silent judgment palpable. Sandra barely acknowledged our existence, offering a disinterested greeting without looking up from her phone. The artificial blue glow illuminated her face in harsh shadows, a fitting metaphor for her character. Frank remained enthroned in his armchair by the fireplace, tumbler of whiskey in hand, remote control in the other, a king who couldn't be bothered to rise for subjects as insignificant as us. His only acknowledgement was a dismissive comment about his surprise at our actual appearance. Despite everything, Kaya had approached him with that beautiful openness children possess. She'd called him grandpa with such hopeful tentativeness that it made my heart contract. His responding grunt had been the first wound of many to come. I'd known better, yet I'd still hoped. Perhaps because Kaya had invested so much in this visit, creating personalized drawings for each family member, practicing writing their names, working on her little gifts every evening for a week before our trip. The care she'd put into these small tokens of affection had moved me to tears one night after she'd gone to bed. We weren't wealthy. Tips from my waitressing job and extra weekend shifts had barely covered the gas for the trip, a new outfit for Kaya, and one small gift for her to unwrap. Each sacrifice had seemed worthwhile if it meant giving her a sense of belonging, of extended family beyond our tiny two-person household. As I watched Frank accept the folded paper from Kaya's outstretched hands, I sensed a shift in the room's atmosphere. He unfolded it with exaggerated carelessness, clearly expecting something trivial he could dismiss with casual cruelty. Then he looked down at the drawing, and something extraordinary happened. His expression changed. The smug superiority drained away, replaced by something I couldn't immediately identify. His eyebrows drew together, not in anger but in something closer to recognition. He blinked rapidly, his jaw slackening slightly. Sandra asked what it was, her tone sharp with impatience. Frank didn't answer. He continued staring at the paper, suddenly looking older and somehow smaller in his chair. With unexpected care, he refolded the paper along its original creases and placed it on the side table beside him. Without a word, he rose from his chair and left the room. No slamming doors, no angry outburst, just the sound of his footsteps retreating down the hallway, followed by the soft click of his study door. Kaya looked up at me, uncertainty clouding her features as she asked if she'd done something wrong. I knelt beside her, drawing her into my arms, and assured her that she'd done something brave, something profound, something that had reached past Frank's carefully constructed walls and touched a part of him he'd long since buried. We didn't see Frank for the remainder of that day. He didn't emerge for dinner, not even when my mother called in that artificially cheerful voice she used when pretending everything was fine. Kaya didn't mention him again, but I noticed how her eyes occasionally drifted toward the hallway where he disappeared, as if waiting for his return. We left early the next morning. I made excuses about plans back in the city, but in truth, I couldn't bear another minute in that house. My mother pressed leftover ham, wrapped in foil, into my hands, and reminded me to drive safely, never once acknowledging what had transpired the previous day. The drive home was quiet. Kaya watched the snow-covered landscape through her window, occasionally squeezing my hand when I reached for hers. I didn't ask about the drawing. Whatever had passed between her and my father seemed sacred somehow, something I shouldn't intrude upon with questions. 4 days later, a small unmarked package appeared on our doorstep. Kaya's name was printed across the top in careful block letters. Inside was an antique music box, wooden with hand-carved edges and tiny painted roses circling the lid. It played Somewhere Over the Rainbow when Kaya turned the small brass key. A simple note accompanied it: "To the bravest girl I know, thank you for remembering her." No signature, but none was needed. Kaya clutched the music box to her chest, her face alight with quiet joy. When I finally asked what she had drawn for her grandfather, her answer brought tears to my eyes. It was a picture of Frank holding hands with my mother and me, not as we were now, but as we had been long ago. She told me she'd written that she hoped he would smile again someday, because she remembered how my mother used to make him laugh. My throat closed around words I couldn't speak. Kaya had seen through decades of bitterness to the man Frank had once been, the father who had carried me on his shoulders, who had laughed easily before grief hardened him, before the years turned him cruel. She hadn't tried to fix him or judge him. She had simply reminded him that he was once someone worth remembering. The music box now sits on Kaya's nightstand. Each night before bed she winds it up, sometimes to listen to its melody, other times simply to hold it, to feel its weight in her hands. A tangible connection to someone she barely knows but somehow understands. A week after the music box arrived, I received a letter addressed to me, 3 simple lines in the same unsteady handwriting. I was wrong about you. She's a good kid. I hope you're doing okay. No signature, but the words loosened something long knotted inside me. I cried after reading it, not because it erased years of hurt or because it suddenly made everything right between us. I cried because for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I felt seen by my father. And more importantly, he had seen Kaya, had recognized the extraordinary spirit that I witnessed every day. People sometimes ask why I took that risk, why I exposed Kaya to people I knew could hurt her. The truth is more complicated than I usually explain. I thought I was protecting her by keeping her away from my family's coldness, by never speaking of them, by creating our own traditions. But Kaya didn't need the protection I thought she did. She needed truth, messy, complicated, human truth. She needed to see that the world contains both cruelty and kindness, often within the same person. And somehow in witnessing this reality, she chose to respond, not with matching coldness, but with compassionate understanding beyond her years. Her simple gift, a child's drawing offered without expectation, accomplished what years of confrontation or distance never could. It opened a door, not fully, and perhaps not forever, but enough to let a small note pass through. Enough for a melody to play in the silence. Enough for a bitter man to remember a piece of himself long forgotten. Kaya taught me something profound that Christmas. She showed me that sometimes the most radical act isn't cutting ties or demanding apologies or even protecting ourselves from pain. Sometimes it's offering grace where it hasn't been earned. Sometimes it's extending a hand across the emptiness without guarantee it will be taken. The empty box still sits in Kaya's closet. She didn't throw it away. When I asked why she kept it, she simply said, "Because sometimes empty things can get filled up again, Mom." Like the music box was empty until the song started playing. Out of the mouth of babes comes wisdom that adults spend lifetimes trying to learn. An empty box became the vessel for a greater gift than any toy could have been. The beginning of healing, of recognition, of remembering who we were before pain shaped us into people we never meant to become. And perhaps that's the most valuable gift of all, the reminder that it's never too late to hear the music again, if only we're brave enough to turn the key.